Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Healing Our Children 2018 World Summit. I'm Alison Morris from Full Potential Parenting, and I want to welcome you to another interview. Today, I'm really pleased to have as my guest, Jenny Carr. Jenny is an anti-inflammatory health coach, an inspirational speaker, and the international best-selling author of the book, Piece of Cake, The Secret to an Anti-Inflammatory Diet. And you can see a copy of the cover of that book behind her. Jenny's going to tell us more about this, but she survived a near-death experience due to an autoimmune condition, and she healed it by continuing with her anti-inflammatory eating and style of living. So she's going to tell us what that means and how it's helped her. And she specializes in helping people reverse chronic conditions by adopting and maintaining anti-inflammatory eating without feeling deprived or overwhelmed. Yay, because that is always the key, right? Is not feeling deprived or overwhelmed. And she's also, we're going to be talking about this too later, she's starting to work more with kids. And so that's why I'm particularly glad to have her here today. So welcome to the summit, Jenny.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. This is such an incredibly important topic. So
yeah, absolutely. So it's probably best to start with a little bit more of your background because you've had a rough several years. Yeah. I can't remember now how long it's been since things started heading south for you.
3.5 years. About 3.5, 4 years ago. Yeah, is when things really got wild and crazy. But before that, I'll reverse a little bit more since this is also focused on kids and talk about how this whole endeavor began, which really was with my son. And our children are our teachers, right? Like we learn so much from them. And I feel like both of my kids have been guides and helping me kind of get to where I'm at with my health and learning all about inflammation and how to remove it from the body. So Tosh is my oldest son. I have an 8-year-old Tosh, and then my daughter's 4. And when Tosh was born, he was really, really sick the first year of his life. And I'm saying everything you can imagine, from every other month having to get on antibiotics from ear infections. He had acid reflux and GERDs. He got rotavirus from immunizations. He got chickenpox from immunizations. He had tonsillitis chronically, had inflamed and infected adenoids chronically. It was just one thing after another. I actually ended up missing, I was a teacher at the time. I used to teach middle school and elementary school, and I ended up missing more time when my son was sick, the first year and a half of his life, than I did during maternity leave, just taking care of him. So that is truly what defines inflammation, okay? Chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation shows up in our body when we have a chronic symptom. So it's important to note how it's not like when you sprain an ankle or just get a stomach bug, right? But if your stomach is chronically impacted, if IBS, Crohn's, or just bloated, whatever, constipated, chronic headaches, chronic aches and pains, inflammation shows up in so many different ways, but also behaviorally and emotionally. So if chronic anxiety, depression, ADD, ADHD, my son ended up with a sensory condition, right? So all of these things come from chronic inflammation. At the time when Tosh was little, I didn't even know what the word inflammation meant. I just was I knew that organic food was healthy for our kids, and I tried to do my best, and I'd always buy right.
Right. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, and then stuff happens, and then if you're lucky, you get people or you find the stuff that starts you down this road to learning more about what the heck is really going on inside our bodies.
Totally. And I think especially for first-time moms, it's really, you don't know. We just really don't know. It's such a new journey, right? And you just want to do everything right, or at least I did. I want to do everything right. I wanted to be the best mom that I could. And so for food, what that looked like was buying Earth's Best organic granola bars and all these organic kid foods that what I've come to learn are organic junk foods. They're full of inflammation.
Right, like organic yogurt.
Yes.
Pop thingies or right. And you're but they're organic, but they have probiotics. And it's but they also have 40 grams of sugar.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
And really like learning that it's even more than the amount of sugar, it's the type of sugar. That's what I focus so much on with my clients, because we've gone from this, you know, there's this big societal kind of movement and thinking around like calories in, calories out, the grams of sugar, the grams of fat, right? And it's more about the type of sugar, the type of fat, and less about the calories and all of that, which I'll get into more.
And even the type of carbohydrates, right? I mean, they're
Absolutely.
not created equally either. So
Well,
yeah, pretty much everything.
Protein, all of it. Yeah, all the macronutrients. But I do want to tell you guys what ended up happening with Tosh, and I'll make it short, but he would get a cold, as many kids do the first year of his life, but it never ended up being a cold. It would always turn to a fever of like 103, 106, even higher sometimes. We were on the doctor, like the phone, like speed dial with the doctor. He would be home for weeks at a time, and every hour I had to report back to let the doctor know how he was doing. We went through so many different antibiotics. I can't even tell you, like his body just didn't. Sometimes it would respond with antibiotics, but most of the time it wouldn't. But he would be so sick with such a high fever and such a bad infection that he would have to get hospitalized to get fluid or IV antibiotics. Like it was just awful. He ended up having surgery, having his tonsils removed, and he was his adenoids removed. And the doctor said, I had never seen such infected and inflamed tonsils from a kid his age. And I said, did you remove them? Because he goes, you really have to remove them. And I said, well, did you do it? And he said, no, he's not strong enough. My son wasn't strong enough to actually undergo that procedure. Yeah. He said, you need to wait until it gets stronger and then you can take the tonsils out. But it was his belief that that was like the root cause of what was going on. The catch-22 was that I couldn't take him out until he got better, but he was sick supposedly because of that, right? So as we were trying to get better, we had gone to the doctor because it was one more like crazy infection. He was home, super high fever. Antibiotics were not working. I was super worried about him. I took him into the doctor. And this whole time in our mind as moms, we're like, am I being overly parenting? Am I like being overly paranoid? There's this whole head game that we play, right? In our mind as moms, trying to figure out what's best for our kid and what's the right thing to do.
Well, right. And then you get so many messages that it's totally normal for kids to have all these ailments these days. Like it's normal for them to have, eczema. It's normal for them to have these weird rashes. It's normal for them to have 18 ear infections and have acid reflux and on and on. And it's like, no. It's common, but it is not normal. That is not healthy. It's not the way our bodies, should be. So, yeah.
That's such a subtle way to put it, but so important. It's common, not normal. So the doctor, like all the doctors, like scales and measurements of determining what's healthy, it scales with society, and society gets sicker. So then it becomes okay for us to also be sicker.
Yeah. Not okay.
Not okay.
Yeah.
So I go to the doctor again, and Tasha's very, very sick. He's lost a ton of weight. He's not eating. He's not drinking. He's got a high fever. And the doctor says, okay, take this other antibiotics in 12 hours or less. It should kick in and he should be much better. So I take him home and I'm sitting there just kind of watching him, and he goes to, we're about 8 hours into the antibiotics, and he goes to walk over across the living room. Well, this is like so hard to remember. And he goes to pick up a toy, and he collapsed. He just totally collapses. And I realized at that point, like, I'm not being overly like paranoid. My baby is super sick, and I go to pick him up and put him in the car to bring him to the ER. And I remember looking into his eyes, and there was like no energy behind him. There was like no life behind his eyes. He was like gone, like he was leaving. And I rushed him to the emergency room where they got him the fluids and IV antibiotics and all kinds of stuff. We were in the hospital for a couple of weeks. And so he finally got to a point where he was good enough. We went to go have the tonsils removed. We had to go to Salt Lake City, which is about 5 hours away, to Primary Children's Hospital. And he had a successful surgery, but he would not eat or drink, which is a common complication for little kids after tonsils. And the doctor said, okay, like, his tonsils have removed, walk him around the hospital and see if he gets thirsty. We just need to get him to drink. And so we took him for a very short walk, went back to our room. He was happy and good spirits. And I kid you not, within like 30 seconds of getting back to our room, all of a sudden the alarms, like all the monitor alarms, it's like they're flatlining. Like alarms going off, the code blue is pressed, and within like 7 seconds there's about, I don't know, 8 nurses and doctors surrounding us, and I don't understand what's going on except for that I know something's not okay, right? And Tosh had completely stopped breathing, but it was like happened so quick I didn't even realize that that's what was really happening. And I specifically, like, I just remember this glimpse where the doctor said, "Are you okay?" And I responded saying, "I think so." And he said, "Good, we're going to the ICU." And it was at that moment I just totally melted into a puddle. Like, how can we be going to the ICU? Like, he was fine, and now he's not breathing. It was so scary. And he ended up being in the ICU and then back in the hospital for a number of weeks. When we got home, the doctor said, like, you can't take him to school, you can't bring him to the grocery store, his immune system is so suppressed. So we had to be home for a long time. That year, when he finally started going back to school, what we realized is that he had a sensory condition. His skin, for those of you who don't know, aren't familiar with sensory conditions, right? Like, it's when your senses are they're like on hyper alert. So he would have a drop of water that would land on his shirt and he would scream and he would say, "Mom, it hurts, it hurts." We live in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where there's tons of snow outside and it's cold in the winter, and he couldn't put on multiple layers of clothes, like his snowsuit and his shoes, his jacket. Like, he couldn't put on multiple layers of clothes and go outside because it hurt his skin. He had a hard time.
So this is way more intense than, like, I just don't like wearing a label on the back of my shirt. I mean, this is like,
labels were also an issue, but yeah, it's way more intense than that.
Because some people think of sensory issues and they're like, and I have to find seamless socks, but this is much more.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, you know, how autism falls on a spectrum, sensory condition also falls on a spectrum. So it could be like, for some people, it's just like a label and their socks, but it also can be much more intense.
Okay.
And for Josh, it was really impacting his day-to-day living.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Learn. It was impacting his ability to make friends. It was impacting his own self-confidence. You know, it was just everything, like, to get up and go. I was talking to another mom whose child also has a sensory condition, and we were just relating how it is to like leave the house was such a big process, to just get the shoes on. Like, just get the shoes and socks on. Like, it's such a big process. So that ADD, he doesn't have diagnosed ADD, but a difficult time with attention. ADD does fall on the sensory spectrum, you know, difficult time with transition. So there's just a lot of ways that it impacts their ability to learn. And so what I had learned myself, my mom, I'm going to kind of just give you the backstory of how inflammation and anti-inflammatory eating came into this. My mom had Lyme disease for 20 years.
Wow. Okay.
She was a Western clothing designer, and she ended up selling her business, completely committing herself to figuring out how to heal. She'd done everything under the sun, literally, with no success. And when she started working with an anti-inflammatory health coach and pushing the inflammation out of her body, for the first time in her life, she was healing. Her symptoms were going away. And so through all of the stress of the year and a half when Tosh had been very sick, I was a teacher at the time. I was like trying to write sub plans, it was just like way too much that I was so stressed out. And so my body started to respond negatively as well. And I started to get super bloated. I was really tired. If I could go to bed at 5 o'clock every night, I definitely would. My hormones got all out of whack. I was nauseous. I was getting like sick, like colds all the time. My immune system felt super suppressed. I gained a bunch of weight. So all these things were happening, and we were trying to figure it out because it was chronic. It was going on and on. And the doctors said I was getting some sort of autoimmune condition. So my mom said, "Look, this is working for me. Lyme is an autoimmune condition. You need to, like, give it a try." And I did, and within like months, all of my symptoms were totally cleaned up, completely reversed. I felt so grounded. I felt so clear, like clear thinking, level-headed. And I said, all right, if it's working for my mom, if it's working for me, I'm going to do a science experiment. It's my favorite thing in the world to do. It's what I encourage everyone here to do. Do a 2-week science experiment, and I'm going to take out the top 6 inflammatory foods from Tasha's diet, which he had been eating well at home, but then I'd send him to school and he'd have, you know, snacks and lunch there. And so I committed to making 100% of his food for 2 weeks, and I saw a remarkable change in his sensory condition. Within 2 months of time of maintaining this way of eating, his sensory condition had improved by 80 to 85%. It was amazing.
Wow. Now, your own symptoms were at least exacerbated just by stress, I assume, which I think a lot of parents can relate to. I mean, I know that I myself came down with a totally debilitating case of hives, which I, you know, we never figured out what the trigger was. I think it was like a weed I touched in the garden that was just the final straw that put my sad body over the edge. But it was like, wow. And similarly for you, you know, with the eating that you had been doing, and then the stress of all the issues with Tosh, that was just like the body said no more. And possibly for him as well, it was just then fighting the infection with his tonsils was the last straw for his little body.
That's the deal. Okay, so if we have chronic inflammation in our body, right, and we'll talk about this more, but diet is the #1 area that inflammation typically comes from people, because food has changed so much over the course of 30 years, and there's so many inflammatory things, even in healthy foods. So I had been like a Division I athlete, marathon runner, like I ate pretty well, but I didn't know anything about inflammation. So I ate well-rounded, right? And I did the same thing for Tosh, but when you add the stress, or when you add in Tosh's case, the viruses and bacterias, the chronic inflammation, like it's like lighting a match underneath like a haystack, right? It's just going to go boom. And either the virus or bacteria, parasites, which I experienced later in life, and I can tell you guys about that later, like that will be exacerbated, or whatever area in your body is more susceptible. So it can be a genetic predisposition. Sensory conditions are often genetically passed down from one generation to the next. Like my husband has a bit of a sensory condition. So that was a area that Tosh was more susceptible to, right?
Right. And a lot of the kids, of the folks who are listening, like we know that they've got like methylation issues, right? They've got that genetic mutation, a couple of those. So they may not have that expressed in their life, but with all the other toxins and maybe, you know, too many vaccines at one time, and whatever else might be going on, then you add on inflammatory food, and it's just, again, it's that allostatic load, which I know Dr. Herbert talks about. She's been a guest on that summit before. That's just like, it's finally just the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Exactly. I love to give this analogy. Oh, perfect. I'm always drinking water, of a mason jar. And our body is like the mason jar. Okay, and the water in the mason jar is like the inflammation in our body. So slowly from, you know, some cake, some wine, some stress, not drinking enough water, environmental toxins, it starts to fill up. And if you have the MTHFR gene, you can't detox very well, but it also takes 2 weeks to remove inflammation from the top inflammatory food. So unless you're not eating something for 2 weeks, it will continue to stack up in your body. And when it overflows, that's when we start to really feel those symptoms. So when it's overflowing, we start to feel the symptoms. And if it keeps overflowing, then the inflammation is just going to go to more areas in our body where we're more susceptible, or make the symptoms that we have even worse, right?
And when we're talking about inflammation in our body, it could be anywhere. It could be our thyroid. It could be right in the junctures in our gut that then allows those big proteins to get through. And then we've got inflammation maybe running. We may be having inflammation in our brains if stuff's crossed the blood-brain barriers. I mean, it can show up in so many different ways, right?
Yeah, it really can. And the way that I help people to try to zone in on whether or not how inflammation is impacting them, typically in more ways than they realize, is to close their eyes and kind of do a scan from their tips of their toes to the top of their head, and think about what symptoms, whether it's mental, emotional, behavioral, or physical, what symptoms do they experience on a daily or weekly basis, meaning a consistent chronic basis, that's less than ideal. Forget whether or not it's tied in with inflammation, right? Forget if you know that. Just do it, like, just do kind of a scan, right? So it could be that, like, oh, I do get rashes here or there, and like it's a consistent thing that's been happening for a while. For the last few years, I've been bloated, or, you know, or constipated, or I get a lot of headaches, or I'm super tired. Like, we all assume as parents that we should just be tired, but like, inflammation really affects fatigue in our body. Yes, if our hormones are out of whack, if we have aches and pains, and that can be from structural issues. I was just talking with a physical therapist earlier today about, you know, you can have a structural issue from an injury or overuse, but that means that that's an area your body's more susceptible. So the inflammation will go to that joint or to that area in your muscle or bone, and it will cause more pain. I've had so many clients that have come to me where they're on the verge of getting surgery, and I say, just give me like 3 weeks, and we literally eliminate the pain.
Wow. Yeah, that's remarkable. So let's dive in a little bit to what do we need to do? How can we start eliminating inflammation? And then let's get to the part about how we do it without feeling deprived.
Yes. Okay. So first, the number one way to eliminate inflammation from your body is to remove the top 6 inflammatory foods. Okay. That's processed sugar. That's modernized wheat, meaning it's genetically modified. It has tons of gluten in it. It is cow dairy. Inflammatory oils, which are most oils, like seed oils, if they've been heated up, are inflammatory. Vegetable oils, corn oil, of course, trans fats. Genetically modified foods, and the last one is alcohol. So those are the top 6 inflammatory foods, and like I said, it takes 2 weeks to push them out of your body. But when I sit here and tell you this list, that can be overwhelming to be like, oh my gosh, I have to eliminate all that. Like, whoa. So I have a secret. This is what my book, Piece of Cake, The Secret to an Anti-Inflammatory Diet, is all about. It's my hack to focus on one food group, and by default, the other top inflammatory foods fall to the wayside for the most part. And that one food group is processed sugar. So when we talk about clean eating, I feel like all the time I'm hearing how people say I'm gluten-free and dairy-free, but it's super rare that I hear people say I've completely eliminated processed sugar. Now,
and it's really common for people who are gluten-free to actually be eating more processed sugar if they're buying packaged gluten-free food.
Yeah.
Right, because it's got, yeah.
It tastes good. It's addictive. It's a filler, and the food companies know it. So they say, "Oh, we're going to make this packaged food look really healthy. It's going to sound gluten-free. You're going to feel so good that you're eating it, and we're going to add it with processed sugar that tastes really good and is addictive. So you're going to want to come back and have more. You're going to think it's really good. Win-win." That's how the multi-billion-dollar food industry works right now.
And when we're saying processed sugar, we mean, you know, the white granulated stuff you get in a bag, the brown sugar that you get in a different kind of bag. I assume that means powdered sugar. It means high fructose corn syrup or any kind of corn syrup. What are the other common ones? Was that mean like maple syrup?
No. So there's
or is maple syrup on the good list?
Maple syrup's on the good list. So there's over 50 names for processed sugar, and it's all in my book. I'm going to give this book away to you all, the listeners, so that you will get a free copy if you want, and you can go look at. There's a chart there that says what the top 50 names are, but I can say if something ends in ose, like fructose, glucose, right? That is a processed sugar. If something ends in like like maltodextrol or maltitol, like those are processed sugars. If something ends in syrup, like brown rice syrup, that is a processed sugar. Unless it's maple syrup. That's the one okay syrup. All other syrups, corn syrup, brown rice syrup, there's so many different types of syrups. All of those are processed sugar. Now the trick is that some of them sound really healthy. Like for example, brown rice syrup sounds healthy. Right,
because brown rice, right? So
totally. You're like, oh, sweet. The one that is super, super common is juice concentrate. Apple juice concentrate, pear juice concentrate. I see this in all health food products. Even when, and you know, it's like they're trying really hard. Maybe they don't even realize what they're doing because everything else is right. Like they're, you know, non-GMO, they're organic, there's no other fillers, but they have the processed sugar in it. And it's often a juice concentrate. So it's easier for me to tell you all, like, look in the book and you'll see those top 50 names, but it's easier to tell you what you can have for sugar, right? So again, it's not about taking sugar out of your diet. That's a whole nother fad of like eating no sugar. Like your kids need sugar. It's an important piece of diet and growth and everything. It's the type of sugar, right? So pure maple syrup is awesome. That's the kind of maple syrup that comes out of the trees, not Aunt Jemima's imitation maple syrup, right? Very important.
So, right, usually in a jar or some sort of a barrel or something, right? Not a plastic thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then raw honey. And it's important that it's raw because if honey is heated, it shifts on a molecular basis and causes an inflammatory response. So you want to use raw honey, which just means it's never been heated.
Although that can't be given to children under the age of what?
Under the age of 2 is what they say.
Okay.
And I won't say it's that they can't be given. It's just that that's what pediatricians recommend. So talk to your doctor about it and see whatever. I gave it to my daughter, but every person is different. So definitely talk to your doctor about that. The FDA recommends 2 years of age and younger not to have raw honey. Okay. So maple syrup is an awesome alternative. Unrefined coconut sugar is another great sugar that you can use. It's low on the glycemic index and it doesn't cause much of an inflammatory response. Those are the 3 sugars. Now there's also stevia, a liquid stevia. It's derived from a leaf plant. And the liquid form is the best form because it hasn't been heated as much to go into the granulated sugar. And that's just a sweetener. It's very intense. You don't need very much. But like I'll use goat yogurt for my daughter, plain goat yogurt, and put a few drops of vanilla liquid stevia, and I can make vanilla yogurt that way. So it's a really great sweetener to add, or make hot chocolate with just raw cacao, and that is a sweetener in the hot chocolate. So it's a really nice alternative to have. And then the last is a newer sweetener that I'm starting to see in health food products, which is monk fruit. And monk fruit is also a sweetener. It's not a sugar, but it's also naturally derived. And I think it comes from the jungles, if I recall correctly. But I am starting to see it more and more, and it also does not cause an inflammatory response. So those are the 5 best sugars to stick with. And of course, fruit, right? Like whole fruit. Awesome.
So how do we get around all the stuff that our kids see at birthday parties, at school, whether at lunches or giveaways from teachers, or the stuff that other kids bring in for their birthdays, at the breaks at sports games or after the game? I mean, this stuff is everywhere. And even people who are trying to be healthier, right? They'll bring in maybe fruit leather or granola bars, right, or again, like Go-Gurts or something.
It's just as bad. Like really, it's like bringing a candy bar in terms of from an inflammatory standpoint.
Right. So what are your best tips for, I guess there's 2 parts to this really, how you can make the shift at home in a way that your kids aren't going to have a huge fit and just refuse to eat, and they're running down to the local store and getting their own stash, depending on their ages, right?
I did that.
Right, and dealing with all the stuff outside your home. Because that I found really just did us in. Actually, it's when I gave up on gluten and dairy free, because I thought it's not worth the time and the effort, because I can't keep her from getting this elsewhere. And it was like, if we can't do it entirely, I'm not sure that our little bit is having any effect at all.
Yeah. So there's two components, like you said. The first, well, in my book, I'm writing my second book called The Clean Eating Kit, and I am addressing all of this in there. So the first one is finding, I think of, if you're familiar with the IT or computer world, they use a term called, oh, now I'm forgetting the term. Oh my goodness. It'll come to me, but it's based, a workaround.
That, okay.
Right? If they're trying to do something in the software, they're like, there's always a workaround in the computer world, in the technology world. And that's kind of my zone of genius, is helping people find workarounds for the foods that their kids like or that they like that don't cause inflammation. So for example, hot dogs have processed sugar in them consistently across the board. You would not think that protein is going to have processed sugar in it. It does.
So even if you bought like Applegate or uncured or, whatever.
So even uncured hot dogs have processed sugar. However, there are one or two brands out there, Applegate being one of them, that if you buy their grass-fed organic hot dogs from Applegate, they do not have, at the moment, always read the ingredients, but they have not for the last 2 years, no processed sugar in those. No funky like preservatives. So, but that's the beautiful thing. If you take out the processed sugar, right, by default, you're taking all the, like if you were to look at all the other hot dogs that have processed sugar, they also have preservatives that are really bad for you, like all kinds of other inflammatory components. But this, because it's grass-fed, it's a clean, healthy protein.
All right, so bacon. Let's talk about bacon. Everybody's favorite food, right?
Right. So similar to hot dogs, right? I know families like to have often like bacon on the weekends, and similar to hot dogs, there's processed sugar in almost all bacon. Now, who would have guessed, right? And so the idea is just, again, finding a workaround. And the lucky thing is that this idea of having truly healthy food, non-inflammatory ingredients, well, there's not a lot of companies out there that support that. They are starting to pop up. So you can find either a whole 30 or paleo-friendly bacon that's uncured, has no preservatives, and has no processed sugar. So this trick, if you really become a renegade researcher and focus on the processed sugar and removing that from your diet, then by default you avoid all the other things, like crackers, for example, right? Crackers almost all have sugar in them. However, if you find a cracker with no processed sugar, more than likely, it's also going to be void of those other top inflammatory ingredients. Now, this doesn't work 100% of the time. There will be possibly some inflammatory oils, like a seed oil, for example, that you might find in chips, which has been heated, and it's not ideal because that does, when the seed oils are heated, it does cause an inflammatory response, but it's not near as bad as the processed sugar, right? So if you really just take processed sugar as the #1 most inflammatory thing on this planet, tied with alcohol, the FDA came out with a statement a number of years ago saying that if processed sugar were to come onto the market now, it would be deemed illegal and a toxic drug. And now this is the FDA we're talking about, who is not the most conservative. So for the fact that they made this statement is really, really huge. And Big Sugar Corporation came in. There was a huge lawsuit about this statement, and I write about it in my book, and the Big Sugar Corporations won. And so the statement had to be taken down. But what's important to remember is the FDA said it would be labeled a toxic drug. Now, if you just stop for a moment and think, gut response, Allison, what is a toxic drug? Like, what comes to your mind?
Oh, like, gosh, something that would be under your kitchen sink or something,
like
right?
Household cleaning products, bleach, gasoline, like these gnarly, gnarly toxins. That is what the FDA is saying, the same processed sugar is.
Or like a heavy metal, like mercury or aluminum.
Yeah, would we put that in our body just in moderation? Would we put it in our coffee? Would we put a 1/4 teaspoon of bleach in our coffee in moderation? Heck no, because it's super toxic. That is the same thing with processed sugar. Now, the big difference is that processed sugar has been like socialized, for lack of a better word, right? It's in everything. It's in crackers, it's in bacon and hot dogs and pasta sauce, and it's in everything unless you find the workaround. And so it's become normalized, just like kids. At the start of this conversation, we were talking about kids becoming sicker and sicker, and that's normalized. So has eating processed sugar. But the problem is people are eating more processed sugar, and what else is happening in our society? People are getting sicker. In this book, I have a whole timeline that shows processed sugar, the consumption of processed sugar, how it's made, with like directly paralleling chronic conditions in our society, and they are totally aligned. So to answer your first question, how do we apply this to our home? It's really like, forget about all the other stuff, those other top inflammatory foods. Focus on processed sugar. Become a renegade researcher. Read the top 50 inflammatory names of processed sugar, not to memorize, but just to get a general idea for them. Read the ingredients of everything you put into your mouth. Everything, everything. Not the nutritional facts. I don't care about how many grams of sugar. I care about the type of sugar. That's what makes all the difference. You could have a Snickers bar that has 20 grams of sugar, or a banana that has 20 grams of sugar. It's not the grams of sugar, it's the type. The Snickers bar is processed sugar, it's inflammatory, it will wreak havoc in your body. The banana is full of nutrients, right?
Well, and of course the other easy way to skip all of that is to not buy the things in the boxes and the jars and the like all the packaged food, right? Yeah. If you are buying fruits and vegetables and you're making your own pasta sauce,
yes,
you know what's in it.
Yes, and that's what this book is all about. I have over 40 recipes in the back that are amazing. But then the truth is, like, when and they're easy. So like finding easy recipes that are because the reality is that's like all great theoretically. But when you're a busy mom, like is that a reality for you to like make everything by scratch? Maybe it is. I did for a very long time because these other products were not available. Like the Applegate grass-fed hot dog is relatively new on the market, right?
Well, and pricey too. So there's that.
Yeah. So this is, though, my next book is all about the grocery store food swaps. So finding grocery store food swaps. You can do it either way. Make everything on your own. Fabulous, super delicious. It's the way to go. It's what I recommend if you can. But if you're like, that's not a reality for me, then I want to find these workarounds for you so that you and also your kids, there is something about food that comes in a package that is a novelty for kids. I've seen it time and time with my kids, and maybe it's because they eat less packaged foods than others, but if they get something in a package, they just think it's the coolest thing.
Right, and by package, we don't mean like a Ziploc bag or a little baggie that you have at home with your, even if it's carrots, right? If it comes in a prepackaged thing of carrots, that's still preferable to the ones that you put into a bag in your kitchen. Yeah, so this is just saying, okay, we're bowing to the reality of the way our kids are right now. We're not going to try to roll back all these social pressures and instead come up with ways that we can find them stuff so they fit in, they feel fine. I mean, they feel like they're cool enough with their kids, with their friends, and they're still eating better.
You have to meet your kids where they're at, and you have to educate them. You have to, your why for your child might be, I want to change his diet because he has a sensory condition. Well, my kid, Tosh, he did not want to change his diet at 2 years old because he has a sensory condition. He wanted to get big and strong so he could play and ski and like have fun. Yeah, and yes, actually for him, like to make it easier to go outside at recess, like that equaled playing, right? So helping your kids find their why is so important. And this ties into the whole sports and extracurricular activities. I'll bring it full circle for you. Our why, our motivation to help them might be like, I'm super stressed because you're always having major meltdowns or you have ADD and I have to deal with like your teachers and everyone else. For you, it might be like you want to be amazing at sports, which is a really common thing for kids. Or they want to grow up, if they're little kids, they just want to be big and strong. I always ask my daughter, I'll have her drink a big glass of water and I say, show me your strong muscles. Show me how fast you can run down this hallway. And they get so excited to show off. Like, how amazing their body is. And the more that we can bring that connection between eating healthy food and drinking water instead of juice, right? Like, that's when they start to make the connection for themselves. It is their why to getting stronger. In our mind, we're like, sweet, like I see a more attention, like a longer attention span, or I see this, we can get out the door more easily, right? Our why is slightly different. But
can I pause you there for a minute though? Because I know for some of the folks listening, like their kids are so far down the rabbit hole in terms of the toxic levels in their body, the inflammation, you know, their behavioral and emotional state is not good.
Yeah,
and
sure.
So like finding any sort of incentive, any why, is a real challenge, because if you suggest it as a mom, it automatically means it's off the table. Like,
you don't want to suggest it.
So just like the fact that you're offering this food means it's not worth eating. Like I can explain till I'm blue in the face about the healthy benefits of non-GMO foods and why we're eating organically. Yeah. It's like, no. So how do we reach those kids who are just like, you know, I mean, part of their condition is to be oppositional because they're just so out of sorts.
Yeah. So the number one thing is that we have to show by modeling ourselves. That's why I never work with families or just kids. I always if someone wants to work with me, one of the parents has to work with me first. And we begin talking to our kids about how good we feel. It's not about them, it's about us. And so what that does is a couple of things. It makes us walk our talk, right? It makes us experience truly how dang good we feel when we push out the inflammation. And when we fall off the wagon, that big contrast, it's like, whoa, I really see this. And so when I was a teacher, there was a method for teaching reading that's called read aloud or think aloud. You read out loud and you're thinking out loud as well. So instead in our mind, we might be reading about a character and asking questions in our mind or making connections. And when we're teaching kids, we're reading it out loud and we're saying the question out loud. We're making the connections out loud. It's the same thing we're doing, but for ourselves. So I might say, oh, mommy's trying this because, you know, I have a bunch of pain in my body, or I haven't been feeling really good, or mommy doesn't have a ton of patience and I really want to have more patience. So I'm going to try this because I learned how much it helps. See if you can tie it into a way that benefits the kid like that, right? Having more patience with them. And I'm learning so much about this thing called inflammation, and I'm going to give it a shot. Will you help me? Will you be a renegade researcher? Will you help me? I can't have any processed sugar. Will you help me read the ingredients? And you get to tell me what I can and cannot eat. Give the kids control. All kids want control. I've never had a kid that doesn't get super excited when I say, you get to be in charge of your family and what they eat. It's your job to read all the ingredients, if they're old enough to read ingredients, or I'll read it to you if they're not, right? And help me decide, is this something that our family can have? And kids get really jazzed to do that. Again, we're not telling them they have to eat it. They get to be in charge of telling their mom or dad what to eat or what not to eat. Like, that's exciting. That's a way to start to bring them in. And then be like, oh, you know, I'm really craving some cookies. Let's try these cookies let's see if they taste good. Let's do a science experiment and see if they taste good. Again, we're not saying the kid needs to eat it. We're just asking them to help out. Like, maybe they want to help in the kitchen or try it and be like, do you think these taste good? And they might like them. It's all about giving them control and helping you on your process. They start to see, oh, the food tastes good. That's all they care about. They want to know if the food tastes good. They don't want mom or dad to take the sugar away. So if we say I'm not eating sugar, they're going to be like, peace out. But if it's like, I'm using a different sugar, does this cookie taste good to you? I think it's kind of good. Want to help me make it? Then that's a hook. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And of course, you know, people might need to tweak that a little bit depending on the, you know, particulars of your own kid and what gets them excited about stuff. But yes, I can imagine.
Yeah, give it a shot. I've literally never worked with a kid who doesn't get excited to be in control of what their parent gets to eat. Like, that is a huge hook for kids.
And you said it took about 2 weeks for the toxins to start leaving. Is that about the time frame that you ask people to kind of give this a try? Yes. And really don't cheat? What happens if you cheat? What if you, by mistake?
Well, if you cheat, just know, like, you know, I fell off the wagon. This is a process. Be kind to yourself. The most important thing is, like, if we beat ourselves up, then we're going to feel bad and we're going to want to comfort ourselves. So we're going to reach for another thing to comfort ourselves. And then we're going to be like, I already messed up once and twice. I might as well have more, and it snowballs. So instead be like, this is a learning process. Like, it's totally cool. I need to make sure I'm getting like clean protein and drinking lots of water, and have it just focus on the processed sugar. I'm just going to hop back on the clean eating wagon and focus on processed sugar. If you're craving something, and I talk about this in my book, it's probably because you're not getting enough protein and clean protein is really important than just any form of protein, which is, I also talk about in there, right? But that's really important. It's also really important for your kids so that they don't have cravings, or the cravings subside significantly. So that's huge. And then making yourself clean cookies or buying them. I have tons of recipes in here for amazing lemon bars, cookies, cupcakes, like amazing, delicious treats that don't use those inflammatory ingredients, and they're quick and they're easy to make. So make a triple batch, keep it in your freezer is what I always say, because we are busy, we don't have tons of time. And when you're craving something, it's really fun to have a cookie and be like, this tastes good, and it's giving me health. How amazing is that?
And are people, and I don't know if this differs in your experience between kids and adults, are we likely to have other issues come up as our bodies are detoxing?
Oh, yeah. So when you are detoxing, thank you for bringing me back here, during those 2 weeks time period, when you're detoxing, the chronic symptoms, the symptoms that you experience on a chronic basis, again, whether they're behavioral, emotional, mental, or physical, can be exacerbated. They don't always. It didn't happen for my son. It doesn't happen for a lot of people, but it can be. You might be a little bit more irritable. You could also have diarrhea or constipation, feel a little bit bloated, or have headaches, like, you know, cold or flu-ish like symptoms can occur. Typically, it doesn't last longer than 3 to 5 days. That's the good news. And the second great news is, by drinking a ton of water. For adults, I recommend a gallon of water per day, which is way more than the FDA recommends. This is not about hydration. This is about giving your body what it needs to push chronic inflammation out. So giving your liver is to water what gasoline is to a car. Water is the fuel for your liver. Your liver has to process the majority of the toxins, and your kidneys. And the way it can do that is by having enough water. And for an adult, that's around a gallon or 128 ounces, 4 quarts. For kids, I recommend anywhere between 1/2 ounce to 1 ounce for their body weight. So for example, my daughter weighs 36 pounds. So a minimum amount that I try to have her drink is around 16, 18 ounces of water. And then somewhere in between 18 and 30 ounces of water is kind of what I shoot for her every day.
Okay. And that can also be, of course, a challenge for kids who are just generally not inclined to want to do what their parents want them to do or ask them to do. Yeah. That's
why you model. Remember, it's not about, like, right now, it's all about us doing our thing. And when they see that we're more patient, when we see that we're more fun because we have more energy, when they see that, like, when they are experiencing the benefit of their mom or dad feeling better, and they've tried these foods that taste really good, at that point in time, we can get them hooked in to wanting to do it too. But so often we want to say, like, okay, you need to do this, or you know, we're all going to do it as a family. But first, this journey really starts with us. It's so important.
Yeah, sounds like a really awesome plan. And important for people to know, again, that symptoms might get a little worse before they get better. So don't get discouraged. That's your body just healing, really. And can sometimes be an unfortunate part of that process, but it tends to pass if you don't lose hope.
Right. It's just the toxins that were stored in your body are now coming out and your systems are having to process it. So you're re-experiencing them. But yeah, it's actually a really good sign. And it,
Or,
like
you know, if you exercise then too, you can sweat it out more. If you have access to a sauna, that might help too.
Lots of water, Epsom salt, hot Epsom salt bath. Those are all really important. Yeah. But don't let it stop you. I feel like, you know, that could stop a lot of people and be like, oh no, I don't want symptoms to get worse, so I'm just going to deal with this. Like, it doesn't happen for everyone. And if you can think about the greater perspective, what will 2 weeks, you know, 3 to 5 days of detoxing potentially, what does that compare to a lifetime of your kid not feeling well?
Yeah, that's, so if people want to work with you, what do they do? They go to, is Jenny Carr?
All of you that are listening, I'm so grateful that you're here. This is such an amazing cause, Alison. So I want to give everyone a free copy of my book. It's an international best-selling book, Piece of Cake, The Secret to an Anti-Inflammatory Diet. You can grab that at www.jenny, that's Jenny, Carr, CARR.com. So www.jenny-carr.com. You can grab a free copy of my book there. And if you want to work with me, you'll get information there as well.
Excellent. I'll put a link to that below. Definitely recommend getting the book and trying out some of those recipes for sure. And then the new book, The Clean Eating Kid, will be out in the fall.
It will be out, yeah, so actually this spring it will be released. Let's see here, I'm trying to think. This spring it'll be released for pre-order. The summer, the book will be ready. So that's super exciting. If you sign up for my newsletter, when you go to my website, you'll get all the information and you'll stay up to date. You guys can even, if you're interested in being on my book launch team, you can have like an early advanced reader copy and get all the inside scoop early.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you so much, Jenny. I told you this hour would just fly by, and I'm sure we could talk for another couple hours, but sadly, I know we need to go, and I'm sure folks listening have to get on with other things too, but I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. We didn't actually even get to your story much, but again, you really credit this diet for saving your life.
I do. And I write about that in my book as well. So if you're curious how this did save my life, you know, it absolutely did, and that's a big part of my journey and my motivation.
Excellent. Yeah, and of course helping your child. I mean, that's got to have just been really painful, and so many of us, our kids aren't maybe that obviously physically ill, but we have to realize that they're so a lot of their behavioral and emotional issues are stemming from things that we can't see that are going on inside of them, inside their bodies, and not just the brains. Yeah, so encourage everybody to take advantage of getting a copy of the book. And thank you again for joining us, Jenny.
Thank you, Alison. It's been an honor, and I wish you all wonderful health.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll say goodbye.
Goodbye.